Today, Kirk and I are going to be walking you through some fundraising metrics, how they can be used, some issues that could be encountered when we're using some of these very common metrics. And we've done so all to the theme of one of our collective favorite movies, The Princess Bride. Now, as we get started, I only want to hear from the people who have not seen The Princess Bride in chat. If you haven't seen it, I want you to raise your hand and let us know. So we've got Tasneem, Jamie. Interesting. So 3, 4, Michelle. Wait a minute. All these people must have seen it. Agnes, Jen, Denise. Oh boy. Okay. Well, there's going to be some stuff in here that you probably won't find as funny as Kirk and I will. Never a great sign when the people telling the jokes are the only ones laughing. Uh-oh. So I'm going to lower all those hands. Thank you for sharing that. And we do have something from Heather here saying The Princess Bride is the best movie of all time. And I have to add in arguably to that statement. It is arguably the best movie of all time. So we're going to start today with a land acknowledgement, obviously something important for Canada and North America. And I would really like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of the land that we are all on today. While we are meeting on a virtual platform, I would like to reflect on the importance of these lands, which we call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Thank you. So a little bit of housekeeping. At the bottom of your screen, there's a few things that we're going to look at. We have chat and we have Q&A. In the Q&A button, you'll be able to ask questions, and I would encourage you as we go through the presentation, ask whatever questions you want. We're going to try to handle them, and you'll be, I'm sure, keeping us on our toes. Okay. I'm also going to ask you to engage in the chat, and both Kirk and I are going to be using the chat to gather some information from you. And there's an interactive part which we've never done in a Zoom webinar. So while we can't actually hear you speak, we are hoping for a little bit of that feedback while we're doing an actual exercise. So what are we doing now? Oh, I'm trying to move my pictures around so I can actually see here. We're going to start today looking at a tactical and strategic guide to metrics. Specifically, we're going to be tackling fundraising metrics, but it is across the board how any of our tactics could be used. We're going to be looking then at the good, the bad, and the future of metrics as they pertain to fundraising in the nonprofit sector. And lastly, we do want your engagement in your chat. If you want to connect with people, we've seen this before, that there's been some very nice connections made. Just share your LinkedIn profile and we can do a little bit of networking between each other using that tool. So metrics, it's what brings us together today. And we're very excited to introduce ourselves. I had to leave these photos in. Kirk and I had scheduled to do this right at the start of the pandemic in Baltimore at AFP Icon. And back before the pandemic, Kirk and I had shorter beards or no beards and hair. Thought this would be mildly amusing here. I've been in the charitable sector for about 20 years. Actually, it's 20 plus at this point. Worked at U of T and some other large institutions in the Toronto area. Also worked in the nonprofit sector as a technologist for Blackbaud, and I'm now the co-founder of Wisely. Kirk, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Kirk Schmidt. I think I'm now on getting close to year 14 in the charitable sector. I'm effectively director of operations for STARS Air Ambulance, based out of Calgary. Although I am leaving STARS at the end of the month, so the email address that we share later will only work for the next month, and then after that you'll have to contact me on LinkedIn. But basically in charge of all of the analytics and the systems here. And then I am a mathematician by training. So even though I fell into charities and fund development, the thing I love the most is mathematics, and my coworkers can attest to that, because usually they walk by my office and the whiteboard is full of Greek letters and they don't know what's going on, and it scares them and it keeps them out of my office. So, it's nice and quiet in there.
An excellent tactic for keeping non-math people out of your office. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at today is a fictional charity, and of course, because we are using the theme of The Princess Bride, it would be inconceivable for us to ignore the Fire Swamp. And Kirk and I are working for the Fire Swamp Trust. We are hoping to preserve the natural beauty and habitat and all its dangerous creatures. Just a side note, we do love creatures or rodents of unusual size. So Kirk, big question for you. You're a metrics guy, you're in fundraising. What kind of metrics are keeping you up at night?
So the biggest thing that always concerns me is metrics that do not tell the whole story, or that uh, that that end up not being what we really want to measure. Because as an industry, we have generally, with nonprofits, gone with these metrics that we've been using for decades, if not starting to come up on centuries. And some of them don't quite measure things the way that we intend for them to, or that we want them to. And so, the things that we'll end up talking about a little bit is things like average gift, and things like lifetime value, and overall database retention rate, and how they are constantly talked about in the industry, but they don't actually measure quite the way that you want them to, or even worse, they're susceptible to things that you might not notice. And so that's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, and you mentioned one of them, which we're going to spend a little bit of time with today: average gift. Why don't we unmask that a little bit? Let's talk average gift. What is it, Kirk, that can make this so troublesome?
So the problem with average gift is that we like to use it as kind of this benchmark tool. We like to say we would like to increase average gift. We talk about, when we compare campaigns, we'll look at the average gift of this campaign versus the average gift of that campaign. Or even worse, what we'll do is we'll put people's entire programs based on that. So a board will look at it and go, well, why isn't your average gift higher? Or even worse, average gift goes higher than you expect, and you can't explain why. So it becomes something that can be very easily manipulated as a metric, depending on what type of approach you want to take with it. And that's what makes it dangerous in general.
Yeah, perfect. What I'm hoping to get here, and I've recently encountered a very senior and superb fundraiser who had as one of their uh, annual goals, was to increase average gift for their entire program. Anyone else have that goal? Who's looking at average gift and has a goal to make that better, make it bigger? Drop it in chat if that's something that you have here. Well, wait a sec before people self-identify. Sometimes this can be really scary because we're not
after I've already talked about it, right? Like, maybe we should have done this before we warned people.
Yeah, and what we do know, Kirk, is that average gift is one of those key things that people look at on a regular basis if they're looking at appeals, if they're looking at campaigns, and they're trying to do some of that math to figure out, should we keep doing this? Should we do more of this? Should we do less of this? But Kirk, if I asked you to raise average gift, what would you say to that?
Well, instead of asking me, we actually have 3 fundraisers who all like to approach things differently. So why don't we introduce our 3 fundraisers, and they can look at different ways of raising average gift.
Great idea. That's almost like we scripted that. So we've got 3 fundraisers here. We have the giant, we have the swordsman, and we have the evil genius. Okay. And we're saying to them, each of you, we want you to raise your average gift by 10%. Now, I think if we looked at all our participants and said, hey, do you want to raise your average gift by 10%? We would actually see, if we were in a room, a huge show of hands. And maybe we can just do that. Anyone here want to raise your average gift by 10%? I'm looking at the hands here. Yeah, now this is starting to look like a safer way to interact with people. So we've got, almost a dozen at least who want to raise their average gift. So how could they do that? Why don't we take a look at how each one of these individual fundraisers would do that?
Yeah, and so if we look at our left here just for a moment, we had that gift distribution, right? So that's what it looks like on year 1, right? This is basically, we've got 250 donors at each of these levels, so $25, $75, $100, and $200. So we're going to ask Andre the Giant to figure out how to raise average gift by 10%. And being the giant, he's going to use the brute force method. Effectively, all he needs to really do is convince one of those people to give a $10,000 gift. And he has methods of getting people to do things that might involve large rocks, for example. But if you look at the distribution on the left, what we had for year 1, and you look at the distribution on the right for year 2, you can see that little smidge of blue at the bottom. And so he convinces one donor to give $10,000. Suddenly, even though all the other donors have stayed the same, even though everything else is the same, he has successfully caused average gift to raise by 10%. Because if we add all of these gifts together and divide by the number of gifts, we'll get $110.
So presumably the boss is still happy about this one.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, really, now we've got a major gift. Isn't that a good thing?
Almost always. Perfect. So the brute force method, let's just get one large gift and we'll just do everything the same. Perfect. Well, what about our swordsman, or the strategic method?
Well, Inigo Montoya is a well-known swordsman. In fact, he can fight with both hands. Now, what he decides is that it is better to go after all donors and get all donors to give $10 more. And that will cause the entire thing to raise by 10%. And I think this is what most people think of. When we say we want to increase average gift by 10%, this is kind of what we think of in our heads as what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get everybody to just increase their giving by just a slight amount. And so you can see in year 1, we had 25, 75, 100, and 200. And in year 2, we have the exact same distribution, but it's for $35, 85, 110, and 210. And this is kind of that perfect way of fundraising.
And I think, Kirk, when I think about raising average gift, this is really where I start to think about how it's normally tackled. We just get everyone to give a little bit more.
Yeah, just upgrade everybody and we're good to go.
Perfect. And then the last method.
Well, this is the inconceivable method. So basically, in this case, why go after all the donors, or why spend all of that time trying to convince one donor when we know that if we don't ask those donors again to give, the likelihood is they won't give. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask the people who are above average to give money, and we're going to forget about the people who are below the average. So you can see on the distribution, all of our $200 donors, we've gotten them to give again this year, and that's the work that we put in. But the people who were $100, and even to a lesser degree, people who are 25 and 75, we didn't ask, or we asked fewer of them, and so we have fewer of them give this year. But even though we have less money and even though we have less donors, we've increased average gift by 10%. We've met our goal.
So this is probably the least desirable of all the methods. But of course, there might be reasons why we would actually want to utilize a method like this. So if we looked at the cost of securing the $25 donor, perhaps that's too high for us. But in general, this accomplishes perhaps what our boss said our target was as an increasing average gift. But we're generally doing our organizations no favors by having less donors.
I'm also realizing I'm starting to look more and more like him.
I'll just not play any games to the death with you, Kirk.
Yeah, and don't start a land war in Asia.
So if we then say sort of our average gift, it might be one of these more challenging but widely used metrics. What is a better way to do it?
So as you can see on the screen, there's a few different ways that you could measure what kind of is similar to average in a way. So median is the first one that comes to mind, and when you play in math land, you might talk about these as being measures of central tendency, right? And probably remember this from high school: mean, median, and mode. And median is effectively the middle value. So if you take all of your values and put them in numerically, so smallest to largest, you take that absolute middle value. And Josh is saying that he loves Mathland. That's fantastic. I love Mathland too. So you take that exact middle value when you arrange them, and that is your median. Now, the nice thing about median is it's not affected by outliers. So it's not affected by the Andre the Giant situation. If we were to pull median gift for the 2 years, when it came to the Andre the Giant situation, that $10,000 gift doesn't really affect the distribution of where that midpoint is. So you're still going to see the $100 midpoint. Actually, it might be slightly less because we had 25, 75, 100, and 200. Anyways, I digress. Now, where it's going to go up is the Inigo Montoya situation, right? Everybody increased by $10. Because of that, your median is going to increase by that $10. And then in terms of the inconceivable method, we would actually see a median increase as well. And that would just be because we have less gifts at the smaller levels and more gifts at the higher levels. So it's not perfect, right? And measuring median as well as mean or average really helps. Now, another way that you can do this is you can do a trimmed mean. So basically what you do is you take the average and what you get rid of are the smallest and largest of any value. So let's say you cut off the top 5% or the bottom 5%. Then basically, again, the $10,000 gift won't be seen at that point, and your average will sit in the middle of what is left. So again, in the Andre the Giant situation, it would still sit around the $100 mark. In the Inigo Montoya situation, it will go up by $10 because everything went up by $10. And in the inconceivable way, you would actually see it go. You'd actually see it move up again because you're cutting off part of those values, but you're actually going to see less impact from say the Andre the Giant situation. And then there's the one that I love, but it's a little bit more complicated, and it's called a Windsorized mean. And so what you do there is you actually acknowledge that there are outliers, but what you do is you assign them a value. So for example, if we know that most of our gifts will never cross $500, you might take that $10,000 gift that was raised and you might give it the value of $500. And so you're basically saying, look, we're going to get a gift that is really high, but we don't know what the size of that is. If it's going to be 500, 5,000, 50,000, if it's going to be $50 billion, We don't know what it is, but we know that there is going to be a certain number of large gifts. And the reason I like this is because that's very much what happens in fundraising. Like even the direct mails we sent this year, for example, the COVID year being such a weird state, we ended up getting some relatively large 5-figure gifts in a direct mail, which is not typical. And so what we might do when we look at this in future years is we probably will receive a certain number of gifts that are high, but we don't know how big. And so we don't want to overestimate what we might do in a future year, but we want to acknowledge that there are going to be a certain number of donors that do that. And then once you've added those numbers together, you take that average. So it acknowledges the presence of all of the gifts without acknowledging the size or the scope of some of those large gifts.
Yeah, Kirk, as I think about this, most of the reports in CRMs that exist today are going to show you, if you look at a campaign or an appeal, how many donors in average. When do you start digging a little bit deeper?
Well, the thing is, if you can pull more than just average, then you have a second benchmark, right? So if you pull median and average, for example, and so for example, I do know that there's one major product that has been around forever in the charitable sector, and you can pull median in there, and you actually can pull mode as well, which is the most common amount. If you pull average and median, then you can kind of compare them and see how far they are off. What happens with a gift curve, and I can't really draw this out right now. I really need a whiteboard behind me, but effectively, gifts in charities follow what is called a positive skew, which means that average tends to be higher than median. And so the closer average is to median, the more likely it is that average is actually okay in terms of it's not picking up weird outliers. As it gets farther and farther away, you are probably picking up those outliers. Another important one is total giving, though. If we had pulled total giving for all 3 of our fundraisers, we would have seen that Andre the Giant pulled in $10,000 more. We would have seen that Inigo Montoya pulled in $10,000 more, and that Vizzini, basically ended up bringing in a significant amount less, even though his average increased. So again, it's about having more information and being able to compare those.
Perfect. And we did have a question come in from Andre from Let's Talk Science. Is it worth doing the same thing for major gifts where you might want to remove under a certain level?
Absolutely. So we'll talk about this a little bit later in terms of cohorting and pulling groups, but think about it this way. So when you have major gifts, you are actually likely going to have a distribution of major gifts. So you might say your normal major gift, let's say, is $10,000, and you're going to have some that are slightly less. You're going to have some that are slightly more, and then more than that. You might want to look at just those gifts and look at the average or the median of those, and completely remove anything that is not what you consider a major gift. But the other thing you could do is you could say, well, if our Windsorized number is $500, as I kind of mentioned, you might want to look at all of the gifts over $500 and figure out what those are and what that distribution is. Because what I'd be willing to bet, and this might be a fun exercise for you to try later, is what you do is you pull all of the gifts that you have in a year and just put them into Excel just by gift amount, and you look at what the average is of that, and then you order them numerically and see how far down you have to get before you hit average. And I would be willing to bet that about 80% of your gifts are under your average, and probably about 85% of your gifts are under your average. I've seen as high as 93 when I did consulting work. So keep that in mind. That, like, if your average is 93rd percentile, that's showing you how much impact those major gifts have. And so you could pull everything above that as one homogeneous group, and everything below that as one homogeneous group, and do things on that.
Perfect. And I think we got another question, but we're gonna head on, and if we can come back to it,
Yep.
we will. We also want to talk a little bit about lifetime value. This is one of those metrics I still wake up over. All of the different ways to tackle this from my days at U of T. So when we look at LTV or lifetime value, are we looking forward, or are we looking at the accumulated value of a donor?
Yes. As you know, being in fundraising for long enough, you start to realize that things get called the same thing. So there's really two fundamental groups. There is the expected amount that you will receive from somebody going forward, and so quite often I will refer to that as gross estimated lifetime value, because that's how much money we expect to receive from them at a future point. Versus the accumulated value, which is sometimes used to figure out lifetime value, which is the, we take Wes and we look at his history and we go, okay, well, Wes has given $20,000 to us. That is his lifetime value to us. And then there's always like hybrids of those, right? Like there's kind of a level of, okay, if they've been with us so long, we expect them to have made this much, and we compare people on that. But what we're going to talk about here is the estimation. Because quite often what we'll do from especially, coming from direct mail land, which is similar to math land, direct mail land will look at, how much will it cost us to mail this versus how much do we expect to receive? And that's where we start to pull things like lifetime value.
Yeah, perfect. So there's a calculation here. So
yeah, so this is from AFP. This is the Fundraising Effectiveness Project's version of lifetime value, and it's kind of the version that gets talked about a lot in the sector. And all it is you take your average annual gift, so you're just taking all the gifts that people give in a year and you compress them into one and average those, and then you do 1 minus the retention rate as the denominator. And basically what this will do is it will say, look, we're going to receive approximately this much money from each donor. And we know that, let's say 50% of our donors will stick around next year. So we're going to basically say, look, 100% of our donors give that amount first year, and then second year, 50% of our donors are around and they still give that amount, and then 25% of our donors are around the next year, and so on and so forth. And what happens is, first of all, average annual gift overestimates. And it's for the same reason that we talked about with average before. It pulls in outliers. So what's going to happen is average is always pretty much going to always be above median. It's always going to be kind of really above what most of your gifts are. So it's an overestimation. So already lifetime value is going to be really higher than what this calculation gives you. The other problem is retention rate will or 1 minus the retention rate will underestimate people. And here's why. Without getting too far into it, new donors. What is a new donor retention rate in the sector, Wes?
If you're really good, you'll get a third.
Sure.
If you're really good, it's probably closer to 20% on average.
And what would you say would be the retention rate you'd see out of a monthly donor who's been around for 5 years?
95%.
Sure. So what happens is all of these different retention rates are being clumped together as if they are one. And so where if you measured this from a year-to-year standpoint, you should see like a 2/3 to 3/4 drop of your new donors will be gone the first year. And then the retention rate slowly climbs up, but never quite enough to make up for that space. So what ends up happening is this entire formula in its construction overestimates on the average annual gift, and it underestimates, or I guess to some degree, it overestimates how many donors you will have in subsequent years. So this thing just goes way off the rails. Ended up doing a presentation for a different like an academic group where we looked at this, and like this formula was overestimating lifetime value up to 300% against our database. And it was simply because of those two metrics being pulled, not being really accurate.
Yeah. So not accurate, and they're influencing each other in a way that makes those inaccuracies even greater for your decision-making purposes. So I hope we're making sense here. And we're about to then talk a little bit about why, like, the consequences of using this overall retention rate. Kirk, can I turn it over to you to make this discussion?
Yeah. So think of it this way. If lifetime value or if retention rate, we'll talk about overall database retention rate. So that let's say it's 50%. If your goal is to maintain or to increase your retention rate, so you've got a goal of trying to increase that retention rate to 55%, it becomes a disincentive to doing acquisition. Because as we just mentioned in the last slide, if your new donors have a 33% retention rate, you know that the more new donors you bring into your database, the more it's going to push that 50% down to 40. If you had all new donors, it would be 33%. Similarly, if you had all these monthly donors that we talked about that have been around for 5 years, and if they're at 95%, if we have no acquisition, we have no other donors, your retention rate is going to be 95%. And every time you change the makeup of your database, you're going to generally change that retention rate. And so using overall database retention rate is completely reliant upon your database makeup being exactly the same year over year, right? And like economists would say, all things being equal. The problem is that if you want to do a big acquisition push, or if you have a year like COVID where, I was telling people earlier this year, be ready for the crush on retention rate in the 2021, 2022 years, because we saw that a lot of charities saw Christmas level direct mail in spring and fall, and acquiring new donors because people saw the need that charities have. And it was kind of like, be ready for that crush, because a lot of those new donors might not stick around, and it might look like you've done something really bad. And it simply is a matter of the typical donor cycle and just what happened with the cohorts of donors this year.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing for people to think about. 2020 and even 2021 are going to be years where your metrics don't look like previous years. And it's going to have a knock-on effect on what your metrics look like moving forward. James talks about using NPV, net present value. Kirk, is that something that you use?
Absolutely. Actually, so net present value, for those that don't know, effectively you have what's called a discount rate or an inflation rate. And effectively you're looking at, hey, 10 years down the road, $1,000 today is not worth $1,000 in 10 years. And so there's going to be a certain, if you receive the same amount of money from somebody every year, you're not really going to receive $10,000 over 10 years. You're really going to receive what is the equivalent in modern day dollars of, say, $8,000. And it's because of that inflation. So it is a good way to offset.
Yeah, perfect. So if we then wanted to start using lifetime value to help us make our decisions, is there a better way to do it?
So the biggest thing you can do is to cohort. And think of it this way. If you are figuring out your lifetime value for the people you're about to acquire with direct mail, and you're including the gifts from the people that your board are friends with that brought in big dollars, or the big corporations that you've been able to solicit, that type of thing, it's going to push the average way up. If you pull an average for just people that were acquired via direct mail, you might have the occasional major gift in there because they've moved through the pipeline, but effectively it's going to be a smaller impact because you're looking at a smaller group. And so one of the things you can do if you don't want to get into really complicated metrics, or as Heather said, like you don't have necessarily the staff or tools to do really complicated stuff. Sometimes the easiest thing you can do is to separate individuals into groups, and actually it was mentioned in a comment before, the idea of separating out major gifts from others. Like you can do this, and you can do it in all sorts of different ways, and so we've got, cohorts can be based on all sorts of things, like giving history and acquisition channels. There's a lot of data out there. For those of you in the United States, you're a lot luckier than we are from a data perspective, because Canada is very hard on privacy. But for like the friends of mine who work on election campaigns in the United States, it's actually kind of scary how much information they can get by just buying it. But there are different ways that you can basically separate out your data, and that will allow you to do things from there. So you could look at just online giving. How do these things apply? How does lifetime of value apply to this? If you apply it to people who were just acquired because your board member brought them in, like what is the impact of that board member leaving? That, you can look at things that way.
And Heather, if I were to offer any advice to you and any of the other small shop practices that people are working in or running, this cohorting, in a general sense, is probably the very best thing that you can do. You break out your monthly donors, you break out your major gift donors, and your annual, if you call it your annual or your direct marketing or your regular gifts. If you have event gifts, you want to treat each one of those a little bit separately, and then look at your retention. Then, even if you're using average gift, knowing that it's flawed, it's easy for you to get. And if you're cohorting, it will not. And cohorting is a verb. We looked it up before we did this. If you're
and apparently it's used by all the health organizations right now.
Exactly. If you are cohorting, that makes some of the issues that would come along around retention rate and average gift flatten out. So our core recommendation for small shops is, bucket your apples, bucket your oranges, and then start doing your math.
And then, as I kind of said before, like average is okay if you cohort, if you can do median and total giving, and a couple of those metrics to just like verify. Those are good. Lifetime value is important. There's just lots of ways you can do it, and it's good to think about that way. And then as you mentioned in chat, the rodents of unusual size. Perfect example of taking averages. So if you took averages of all the rodents, you're going to be offset by those rodents of unusual size, which, for those of you who haven't watched Princess Bride, that is a Princess Bride reference, or read the book. So if you take the average of all of the rodents together, it might be thrown off. But if you take the average of rodents of unusual size, and you see what they're at, and you take the average of normal rodents, you might see two very different values, and that's more what you use as a benchmark. Is this a relatively large rodent of unusual size, or is this an average rodent of unusual size?
Perfect. If you want to learn more, Kirk has actually built up a course based on our work here and his work history. That's on Udemy. He's got a coupon code. If you want to sign up, I would recommend it. The link just got shared there along with the coupon code. So I recommend, if you want to learn more about metrics, that's a good place to start. As we've got really two things left, and we got about 15 minutes. So we're going to go on the little bit, we're going to speed things up a tinge. Hopefully we're not making too many mistakes or glossing over some important concepts as we go here. So, leading and lagging indicators or metrics are really important for us to be able to spot things that could be coming up. And in the Princess Bride, this is the fire swamp. We're trying to raise money for it.
and the fire comes up. And in this particular case, the fire itself, that heat, is a lagging indicator. And we might want to think of that as like money coming into your organization. That's what we need. But if we don't know what's coming, we can't avoid that fire. Okay. And there's ways you'll hear a gurgle and then you'll know the fire is coming. And that gurgle noise from the fire swamp that it makes before the fire comes is the leading indicator. And when we're talking about fire coming up around where we're walking, it is a very important leading indicator. So what does this look like in fundraising? We're looking at leading indicators and lagging indicators on donor retention. And dollars raised, for instance, is a lagging indicator of fundraising success. Yes, dollars raised tells us if we're being successful or not, but it is the end state. Okay. Instead, looking at the number of donors contacted, that would be a leading indicator that we are making progress towards our fundraising targets. So we then start with a goal. What does this mean? Let's put this into practice a little bit. So the fire swamp needs $100,000, and we have gift officers, and they're connected with donors and their portfolio. And we say, hey, gift officers, let's go out and raise some money. The lagging indicator in this would literally be a donation. It is our goal. But if we start to break down what is required for us to get the money, we know that we need to actually talk to people. We need to talk to people about their gift and how it's important. And then we need to ask them for that gift. And then we need to steward them to make sure that it's available for us to the future. And if we start to break this down, we then know that actions would be the most important thing that we can use to track if we're making progress to that gift. We don't get little bits of money from a donor along that journey. So little bits of money isn't useful for us to actually figure out if we're doing the right things. So when we think about leading and lagging indicators, we always want to consider what are those things that we can track in advance that will tell us if we're on our path to our goal. I hope that made sense. I went through it pretty quickly, but I did want to make sure that we had time to actually review a metric in person. So I'm going to stop sharing. Kirk's going to take over control here. And what I'd love for you to do is just open up your chat. And we're crazy. We want to get from you a metric that you use, and we're going to just really think about, like, what is this metric? What is the goal? We all have goals that we have to achieve. So if we have that goal, we can then figure out a metric. What is it supposed to measure? Is it leading or lagging? And what are some of the things that we can do to look at this metric or this goal in a better way? And I've got Jen saying number of major gift asks. So Jen, if we're thinking of number of major gift asks, we've got cost per dollar raised as another example. And I think we might just do one of them in the interest of time today. Kirk, did you have a preference here? Oh, you went on mute.
I just realized that. I feel like okay, that everybody's bingo sheet. Somebody's on mute. I feel like cost per dollar raised is gonna just make me very angry, very very quickly.
Perfect. So,
it's something good to think about because it, yeah, you know what, cost per dollar raised is kind of a fun one from a this is what the entire industry looks at.
Absolutely.
So I despite all my rage, still just a rodent of unusual size in a cage. I'm go cost per dollar raised.
Okay, I'm excited about this one. It's something I care a lot about. I didn't want to get you angry, so and yes, we got you did not just make that quote from James. So well done. Bravo. So when we're looking at cost per dollar raised, then what is this metric supposed to measure? So when I think about cost per dollar raised, it is like the effectiveness of our fundraising. And I'm not sure if there's something more meta than that that we could be considering, or more specific.
So I'd be curious if anybody in chat have any other use for this metric, or view of what this metric measures.
I'm assuming we're going to see, because our board told us any second now. So Corinne writes, if you focus on monthly donors, cost per dollar raised doesn't reflect the effectiveness of a fundraising campaign. We're going to be using that one in a minute, Corinne. Thank you. And I have, because our board told us to measure it. I guess this metric is also good for donors. We know donors actually care about this.
So why would we think that this works well for measurement?
Good question. Well, we're waiting for someone to chime in on chat here. It is a very global concept of like how much, if this metric is like looking at the effectiveness of our fundraising, both for our administrators and our board, then I would say it shows that we are actually doing, good work with the money that we're getting.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, it does show how much money effectively is going to the cause.
Effect from a single donor.
From a single donor, correct.
Yes.
And quite frankly, it does show that, in a given year, from a given donor, it is the amount of money that does not go to the cause, theoretically.
We're not wasting money, if you will, is what Rachel's saying here, the ratio of dollars raised against expenses. And I think expenses is a good consideration.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. So basically what we built here, and this is something that we built for AFP when we were supposed to do this talk last year. We're gonna answer some questions about this metric. So talked about how lagging and leading, what's lagging and leading, things like that. So thinking about cost to raise a dollar, what is a leading metric for this KPI? What, thinking about this in terms of if cost to raise a dollar is the end state, what is it that we need to do, or what is it that we could measure earlier that would let us know what this is going to be?
Actual cash in the door and cash out the door. We've got something that brings it further back from James, cost per lead or cost per prospect.
Yeah. Could also be the budgetary cost to raise a dollar, because theoretically you're going to have a budget on this.
ROI on any campaign.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to go far enough back, you can even think about this in terms of retention rate and we'll call it typical gift amount, because that's going to determine how many donors you're going to end up getting and how much they're each going to give, and therefore.
A good retention rate helps you raise money at a low cost. Very good leading indicator.
Yeah, actually, the funny thing is, because cost to raise a dollar is such a prolific thing, and it kind of encompasses everything, we probably could put almost every leading metric that exists in the charitable sector, and it would somehow tie into this. Is there a lagging metric associated with this? Is there something that cost to raise a dollar leads to?
Just before we answer that question, Kirk, I see Michelle's got to leave and we're approaching 4:00. I wanted to let everyone know that a copy of this presentation will be emailed to everyone, including a video so you can catch the last, what I assume to be our last 10 minutes. And I'm committed to going overtime, but if you can't stay, we definitely understand. So Kirk, is there a lagging metric associated with this KPI? I'm not sure there is. Like, this is the most lagging metric that exists in fundraising.
So actually, interesting that you should say this, because I've been experimenting with something, and I don't want to get too far into this, because I could probably start ranting for a good hour on this. But there's really two expense revenue ratios, because that's what cost to raise a dollar is ratio of revenue to expenses. And if you look at the ROI type calculation on an individual campaign, or the effectiveness of your of being able to generate money from that, and the other ratio, which is just how much do you spend on expenses versus revenue in a given year, the combination of the two can actually give you what I would call the years of borrowing. And so effectively what it is let's say you give me $100, Wes, and I spend 50 of it to try to get more people to give money. Eventually I will get another 50, or I hope I will get another $50 back. And so I've borrowed your money, or borrowed 50% of your money for maybe a year. And so actually, if you tie those two together, you can actually figure out how long do you borrow donors' money in order to invest it into other fundraising, other stuff. So I don't want to get too far into it, because I'm currently writing the paper on it, but that is kind of a neat way to think about it.
Yeah, and I think that aligns directly with, I believe it was Corinne who said this about monthly donors. And typically your payback period on a monthly donor is 18 months.
Right.
So it doesn't look good on an individual campaign basis in the year that you're running. That investment, if you, as I think about it, isn't going to break even for a year and a half, typically.
And so the next question we ask is what data will adversely or unintentionally affect this metric? And this is where we kind of talked about a single donor giving a large amount ends up throwing it off, or a large acquisition year throwing off retention rate type thing. The question is are there things that affect this? And because it is kind of the final metric, it's the end boss of charities. There's kind of everything involved here, in terms of whether or not you get major gifts, whether or not you have high retention years, low retention years. If you spend a lot on acquisition in a year, your cost to raise a dollar is going to go through the roof. It might even be higher than $1. If you're just measuring, say, the acquisition program, you might be spending $2 to acquire $1 in year one, right? So there's that piece. How could this metric be modified, or what metric could replace this one to mitigate issues with outliers and external data? I think that's the $1 million question in the charitable sector, actually.
Yeah, and the thing that I've always liked to be able to do goes back to something we talked about earlier, Kirk, which is cohorting.
That's
And
right.
I like to establish these cost per dollar raised on programs that give each program the ability to both invest in the future and achieve certain metrics that they have to do the good work that's required this year. So if you think of on the annual side, and we talked about monthly donors, it's what is the balance between monthly donor acquisition and cash in the door this year?
And then to just piggyback on that, What I actually find is a better way to look at this is not cost to raise a dollar in its pure form, or even ROI if you want to use the inverted form, which is what every business uses on the planet. But look at change year to year of cost to raise a dollar for a particular cohort. So if your acquisition program tends to have a cost per dollar of X, and in year 2 it has a cost per dollar of Y, then it gives you the opportunity to go, is this about what we expect? Is this lower? What did we do to get there? Is it higher? What did we do to get there? And so it's less about unintentional data influencing, but more about being able to look at it objectively and go, is there a reason for the change, and why did we have that change? Because that becomes more important, I find, on a board level, to go, look, we're fundraising exactly the same as we do normally. We're just spending more on acquisition this year, and it's going to do good things later because we're not seeing massive change in the delta, in the changes.
Yeah. So looking at investments in future revenue as a separate line could be a way to tackle that, as
right.
opposed to our overall cost per dollar raised. I do want to just make a call out. It's 4:01. We are running over. Kirk and I have been a little verbose. I apologize. We are going to finish this. If you can stay, great. If not, we will email you both the video so you can actually catch the last 10 minutes or so that we're going to finish up on. With that, Kirk, should we then head back to our presentation?
Yeah. So we will share this worksheet out with people because I think it is a good opportunity for you to look at if there are particular metrics that you use quite often. It's even just a good opportunity to think about those metrics and to start thinking about, are there things that are messing with this? Are there better ways for me to measure this in the future?
Awesome. So I am seeing a couple people message me saying they've got to run. We definitely understand. We hope you got some value, and onwards. So if we look to the future, what are metrics going to be like? And, they're not really going to be wrapped in mysterious cloaks. Kirk and I had debated showing off one of his mathematical formulas that's really quite good at predicting how much people are going to give in the future over the lifetime of their giving. But that's going to be run by apps in the future. The computers are going to be doing this. And we know that metrics are going to be more user-friendly. They're going to be predictive, and they're going to be used by machines and people. The cohorting is going to be done for us. And honestly, I can't wait to get there across the board. And the metrics are going to be, as we wish, as opposed to, I wish Kirk was on our team and running all our metrics. So we're going to get away from, the pit of despair and doing VLOOKUPs in Excel for a large part. And we're going to move into this concept of advanced business intelligence and AI. So when we think about what these things are going to do, is like, they're hard to calculate manually, but we can build programs that can calculate these for us to augment our intuition. So Kirk and I have been doing this for a long time. It's easy for us to spot trends and numbers because we've kind of dedicated our professional lives to doing that. The metrics and the applications of the future are going to help augment your ability to do that and do some of that work for you. And most importantly, they're going to prompt action. So this prescriptive nature is going to do these difficult calculations and say, here's something you need to do. And, we like to think of the who, the how, the when, and how much are questions that will be answered for us in an automated way in fundraising. To give you a non-fundraising example, this is Kids Helpline out of Australia. They have a very public presence about how they're doing their work, which is why I'm giving this as an example.
And in a chat bot or over the phone, they're able to effectively measure the emotions of both the agent and the kid that is potentially in crisis. And they are then able to escalate calls if they think that there's elements of danger for the kid, or the agent isn't being able to connect with the kid that is in crisis, to be able to automate that reconnection to a more senior staff member or someone more well suited to deal with this particular situation. And that is, I think that's a really good example of what we think the future of metrics is going to look like. So as we bring all this together, we do want you to think about the metrics that we use, and we're going to share that word template so you can go through that as an example and look at your metrics and probably try to rethink that from a different perspective. Can we do it a little bit better? Understanding if they're leading and lagging. If we know that if we're looking at our leading indicators, that gives us time to course correct before all of a sudden it's the end of the year and we're short of our goal. Okay. And as we think about goals, what are they really? Can we break them down on how we get there? And the thing I'd love to be able to say here is that just because a metric is used industry wide, it doesn't mean it's a good metric. And the AFP organization out of the United States has published a sort of guideline of metrics. And I think that is really important work. But some of the metrics in there don't involve cohorting, and it isn't necessarily 100% appropriate for what you're doing. So even when we look at average gift and standard lifetime value, we have to make sure we understand what it is before we then make decisions about what we're seeing there. Kirk, do you want to talk about that for a quick second?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that you can't rely upon the metric blindly. Every single one of them is a good calculation, but it has to be used in the right context. And there are a lot of cases where it ignores some of the, like the acquisition problem with retention, right? It ignores certain aspects that can affect it. So we just need to be thoughtful in how we approach metrics going in the future if we want to be truly data-driven decision-making organizations.
Yeah, thank you so much. So if you've enjoyed our talk, we'd love some feedback from you. Number one, how can Kirk and I do a better job here next time? Take a second. If there's something that you want to learn more about, I'd love to be able to put together some content on that in the fundraising space. Drop a comment in the chat about any future topics you'd like. That's the name of my brand, the Blind Metrics. I like it. As we think about like some future topics, throw them in here. If you want to throw tomatoes, I don't think you're going to reach us. Kirk's in Calgary. I'm in Toronto. So, have at it. Try not to ruin your webcam or your laptop. Our emails are there. You have our LinkedIn. I would encourage you to reach out to either one of us. Should you have any more questions, please connect and ask. The last thing, we're here for you. As I just said, if you have a question, let us know. We're going to send out a follow-up email. There'll be a link to Kirk's Udemy course. We're going to offer up a group demo for anyone that was here, or a private demo of Wisely, should you be interested. And lastly, we have free trials available to any organization where we integrate with your CRM. We'd love to help you out and raise more money. I got some thanks here, Josh. Peanuts, my favorite. I really mean it.
Anybody want a peanut?
Well,
All right,
with
thanks
that,
everyone.
yeah, with that, I wish everyone a good afternoon, and thanks for staying with us over time.